Hi, and welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions. Today is going to be a little different, more of an interview style and less of my ranting. So please sit back and enjoy. Because I have my mommy here, Miss Carmen, and I decided to interview her. Hopefully, she'll be on her best behavior. She's giggling like a like a 3-year-old right now, but so it's just going to be kind of a little different from the previous episodes and more like an interview style. We're going to be talking about mental health within the Latino community and kind of how it's really shaped our families, both her upbringing when she was young and her siblings, and then me and her style of parenting with me and my brother now. So, Mom, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little about your childhood and some of your biggest influences on your emotional and mental well-being growing up.
Well, I'm Carmen, Jessica's mom, and I am one of 8 siblings, 4 sisters and 4 brothers. Grew up with my mom, my dad, who was an alcoholic, and my grandmother, who was blind and had Alzheimer's. So we grew up in a very hectic life situation. We were poor, but not poor where we didn't have food or shelter. Just living with the basic necessities in our lives. The way we dealt with our school clothes, it was on layaway. It was always 1 or 2 fashion sessions behind schedule, but we had clothes, we had food, and we lived in a decent apartment. My influence...
Quick question, just to kind of cut you off, but where do you land in your number of siblings?
Oh, I have 2 older brothers and 1 older sister, and then I have 2 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters.
So you're like a middle child.
I'm like a middle child. The adopted middle child. Middle child.
We often joke we don't know where my mom came from. We're still not sure. It's still up for debate.
Yes. The influence in my house, or growing up as an influence, I think my parents were the biggest influence. I know for sure when it came to drugs, sex, and being a normal teenager, we were more fearful of my mother and my father than peer pressure. At least some of us were. Others, not so much. The younger siblings, I think my mom was tired by the time she got to the younger siblings and allow them to do what they wanted to do. But for me growing up, there was a structure of a father in the house who was an alcoholic, who was very strict, very old-fashioned, very machista, very women need to clean house, keep a house clean. You need to learn how to cook. I cannot tell you how many times I heard, if you don't learn how to cook, your husband's going to beat you down, and he would have every right to beat you. Very, very draconian style of thinking when it came to influencing his daughters. My brothers, on the other hand, had carte blanche to pretty much do what they needed to do or wanted to do. School was an important factor in our lives. My mom required us to go to school and make it through high school was their aspiration.
I mean, it makes sense for the time period.
For the time, in the late 70s, early 80s, it was just graduate, get a job. I started working when I was a junior in high school, and I had the responsibility, like most Latinos, that you have to contribute to the household finances. My mom was on public aid, and my dad worked, but when his alcoholism became very out of control, it just didn't work out for him, and soon the family started to start fall apart. It was starting to show a more serious fracture than what we had seen prior. Growing up, I was very aware of my father being an alcoholic, being in rehab at least 3 times that I remember, but it never took. It just consumed his life, and unfortunately, he died of liver cirrhosis. So yeah, it's a very challenging times.
Yeah, that makes sense considering all the people in our family. I don't know. I think for reference, my mom's parents are Puerto Rican.
Yes.
Both from the island, both immigrated here.
Yeah.
And I think that also adds another cultural influence that necessarily me and my cousins don't have, or, you know, anybody kind of in my age group within my family, because all of our parents were born here, lived here, and I think have also good grasps on language and kind of, so if you could talk more about like how also language has influenced, because my grandma is 83 now and likes to pretend she doesn't know English still. She does. She knows what you're talking about. She'll play stupid though.
Yeah, she does.
But I love her for it anyway. But she still has very broken English, and she watches Wheel of Fortune to like try to pick up on words. And it's so funny to, one time we were listening to her watch Wheel of Fortune, and the word was lobster, and she goes, crossword. Like, she's just like, she tries her best. But I'm just curious more about like the language aspect, and then being the daughter of immigrants, but not necessarily maybe the traditional sense we think of immigration, as in not having citizenship and stuff like that.
Right. My father was uneducated, did not even make it into first grade. My mother had a sixth grade education, and my mom had a special skill that I thought was unique. She was raising children and wasn't very fluent in English, but she would watch Sesame Street and would pick up the words.
I just reposted a TikTok that said Sesame Street was made for inner city kids, and because people were complaining it's too woke, but it was literally made to help bridge the gap in education.
My mother would watch that and learn the ABCs, and what was interesting, with her limited sixth grade education in Spanish, not in English, she did try to help us with our homework. And as we got older, her ability to read it in English and translate to Spanish, or read it in Spanish and translate it to English to us, became very crystal clear that she had a special skill set that most of us to this day, you know, being citizens and living in America and visiting the island, we can't comprehend. So I thought I was impressed with that, because many people who come from the island or are Puerto Ricans can't even speak Spanish. So it was interesting. So.
Yeah, and she still does like word searches and crosswords. So I think that's something that she still practices, maybe not in the same way.
Right.
But... So with all these kind of influences and factors, how do you think, as a young woman, what we'll say like before 18, before like children, how those influences impacted your emotional and mental health?
I think that back then, and I mean back then in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, there wasn't any emphasis on mental health. I mean, it was just, you know, we grew up with very disciplinarian parents, very close to corporal punishment. It was that old school, just beat down your child until your child has no hope of ever surviving. And thinking to yourself that this is normal.
The fuck is wrong with these people?
So yeah, I looking back now, I see how stifled I was. There wasn't any room for sharing emotions with your parents or negotiating with your parents. It was, you know, parents ruled the house with an iron fist, and my mother having 3 sons who were being raised on North Avenue in Walcott, which now is Yuppieville and very upscale. It wasn't when we were up there. She had to manage my siblings with an iron fist, and she was very proactive in the community as far as who the gangbangers were, and would say, these are my sons, they're not gangbangers, leave them alone. She built good relationships with these individuals, and it allowed us to navigate North Avenue and Walcott in a more safe space and more kind of isolated from everything else going on. So she had the right idea. That would be called a youth worker today.
Well, how does that influence you? Because I think that sounds very similar to what you do, Miss Ma'am, or did, Miss Ma'am.
Yeah, I spent 33 years in the nonprofit world, youth development. I think it influenced me because growing up poor, you don't have many opportunities that other people have and squander. But it helped me to understand how you feel isolated, how you're poor, how you don't have these opportunities. And it was very important for me to create opportunities for youth. Job development is my passion, creating opportunities for jobs for young people. I was able to get my first job when I was a junior in high school, which is about 16, 17 years old. And I did the work-study program. So I went to school from like 6:30 to 12:30 and would work for a doctor from 1 to 8. So I was one of the few students who had the opportunity to work a full-time job and still go to school. And with those resources, I had to contribute to the family household. So I know firsthand how many of our young people today, especially in black and brown communities where we have to be a part of a ecosystem and not independent, they need those opportunities to develop. I think it was very useful for me as a young woman to work and develop my skills early on, because in my home, it wasn't going to be supported.
Interesting. I mean, I think that's very obvious, and I think your work ethic too is pretty admirable, because I do not want to work that much. I want to work as the least amount I possibly can, because no.
Yeah, I think I got that from my mom. I think she pushed that on us. My mom.
What do you think? Not to interrupt, but what do you also think of the idea of like Latin women kind of acting almost as like rehabilitation centers for their families versus having their own independence?
My mom was probably the template for me being a martyr. She had an alcoholic husband, all these children. She had 6 children she was responsible for, and my dad had 2 children from a previous marriage. So it was her blending these families, and an alcoholic husband and a mother who was blind and had Alzheimer's. So she was a stay-at-home mom, probably up to the age of 40 when she got her first job at Woolworths.
Any of her kids even? I said, were any of the kids even in the house at the time?
They were already grown. I think Maribel and Lorenzo were the youngest, and the youngest being, high school age and things like that. But it just spoke to, she didn't have an identity outside of this martyr in the house trying to keep us all together. There was always breakfast in the morning, lunch on weekends, and dinner. It wasn't a choice of menu like you have.
She don't give me a choice of menu either. My grandma lives with us currently, and there is no choice of menu right now. It's what she puts on the table. You're going to eat it. You're going to like it, love it, learn it, cook it.
Right. So, yes.
I just choose not to.
So that was...
Mocha, get out of there.
That was very clear. As I got older and looked back and through my own therapy, I was like, yeah, my mom was the template for that type of thinking, that you have to sacrifice everything to be a mother or a good mother or be perceived as a good mother.
That is interesting. So just thinking about some stuff. So now I'm kind of moving away from like your earlier years before 18 and moving towards like 20s, 30s even, and talking about kind of some of the mental health. I know there were big changes during this time for you as well, of like becoming a mother for the first time, having children, and kind of finding your own identity being a mother and being so young.
Yes.
So I just wanted to hear more about during that time, besides, or you could talk about like postpartum being a big part of your like mental health journey, but like what other factors contributed to that?
Well, I was a mother like most Latinas, or many Latinas in the days, back in the day, not so much today. I was a mother. I became a mother at the age of 20. So my son and I grew up together. We're 20 years apart. So that was a big challenge, and was soon married his father became a wife and was at home, left my job that I had obtained when I was in high school, and was a stay-at-home mom for about a year, and realized I'm not one to ask for permission. I don't like asking for $20 to buy a pair of shoes or buy my son something. I had a nice, place to live, and he provided, but there wasn't much independence, and there was, it was like being at home with my father the frying pan to getting married and jumping into the flames. I had a
poetry.
Huh?
Poetry.
It was not good. 2 years after my son was born, I had became pregnant, had a child, and went into early labor. And that child came into this world, but passed away about 3 weeks after he was born. So it was this. I think probably the best introduction, if there is a best introduction into mental health, was dealing with the grief of my son. That was a very difficult time. And then shortly after that, I got divorced. I was on my own, co-parenting with my son's father.
I mean, I think also during that time, what a lot of people forget too is that women are in postpartum for up to like 10 years after they give birth. So you had two kids pretty close back to back, so you kind of didn't get a chance to even get out of whatever postpartum comes from the first one, and then the grief of the second one that comes with that.
Yes. At that point, I was starting to think of things differently, see things differently, more of what do I want to do, what kind of jobs do I want to get acclimated to, understand. Still wasn't a college graduate at this point. But I started working, and through the different jobs that I obtained during maybe like a 10-year period, I started to develop my management skills, my no-nonsense, get-it-done type of mindset. And I saw myself moving up, in the different positions into managerial jobs, and started to explore going back to school. But like most single moms, school is probably not an option all the time. So, just pushed it back a little more and a little more. And then in my 20s, late 20s, 29, 30, 31, around there maybe, that's where I started to focus on school. And as you know, today I hold 2 masters, one in higher education and one in nonprofit management. And my career since then has been working. I did work in environments that my children were able to participate in. I didn't work for corporate America. I was working for nonprofits where Enrique can come and hang out with us. You were, we see pictures of you as a child in places that I've worked, and continue to do so, work in industries that allow and support the balance of work and being a mom.
Yeah, I think
the best they can.
I think you just skipped over one of the most important parts of your life, which was my birth. You went from I had a son and then I was in my 30s. Skipped like the next 10 years, which was crucial.
Well, you didn't come into my life.
You were 38. Yeah,
yes.
But you're talking about getting 2 masters. I was like 15 when that happened. You're skipping crucial time periods.
I met Jessica's father about maybe 7-8 months after I got divorced.
Yeah, skip all that.
Not looking for a relationship, but here we are.
So we skipped all that other shit.
Was with Jessica's father about 10 years before Jessica was born.
And
Jessica, I learned I was pregnant in May, around Memorial Day. And that began the journey of
never mind, I'm not gonna say that.
dealing with being 38 and working full-time as an executive director, dealing with the changes your body goes through at the age of 38 to have a child.
Yeah.
Vomiting everywhere. I would stop off on North Avenue and Kimball, and there's a bubble land up there, and I would have to pull over and throw up.
That's disgusting.
But those are the challenges you have. Then Jessica was born. I was fortunate enough to be in a position where I had my 12 weeks of maternity leave. Back then, that wasn't so, out there, and not everybody had those opportunities. But that allowed me to stay at home. But I had to go back to work, and Jessica went to daycare, provided by a family member.
School of Hard Knocks.
And we worked. It was Jessica and I together all the time outside of work. So it was difficult not sleeping at night and going to work the next day to have a board meeting or have some challenge in the work environment. But we made it through.
How would you describe your mental health during that time? And mental health, I'm talking about like right after you had me. And then also maybe for context, my brother is Latino as well, from both his dad and my mom. And then me being a black daughter might add some different.
Yeah, I had when I gave birth to my first son, I did not feel any real obvious changes. Now, granted, we weren't as aware as we are today. And with my second son, I think it was more the grieving, the whole pregnancy ending at 24 weeks, so those body changes, but I really didn't have time to focus on that because I was grieving a child and raising the other one who was still present and in need of my presence. But with Jessica, I did really quick realize that I was having postpartum depression, and then the anxiety kicked in. I would be driving to work or to go pick her up, and I would have a complete meltdown where I had to pull over the car and to sit there for however long it took for it to pass, because the anxiety makes you believe that you're going to drive your car into a group of people or into a wall, and it's just your body's going through all these changes. I learned to identify when these episodes were starting to happen, but I never sought help. And Jessica at this point is probably about 18 months old. It was just weird. I would tell her father I was feeling weird, and might as well just talk to the wind.
Mental health doesn't exist.
Yeah,
I think for more context, more talking about like how did the people around you view mental health, whether that was dad or your own
He
family?
kind of brushed it off as like,
Oh, that's such a shocker, by the way.
He almost brushed it off as like, oh, come on, this is your third child. What are you kind of? He didn't say it, but you can feel it.
He's really good at that.
Yeah. He, one time he said, well, are you going to hurt her? I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't think so. But yeah, it wasn't very supportive. My family, you learn to hide stuff in your family. In certain families, you learn to just exist in chaos, because that doesn't happen in our families. It does, but I'll explain to you how that shows up in our families. So it was just me trying to survive. Finally, I would say Jessica was probably around 10, 11 years old. I couldn't drive anywhere.
A decade later.
Yeah, a decade later. I couldn't get in the car and get on the expressway because I would have this feeling of anxiety and, oh my God, I gotta get out the car. Oh my God, we're gonna die. Just fear. And one day, in my regular annual checkup, I decided to tell the doctor this is how I was feeling, and she gave me some anti-anxiety meds, and that helped. That helped a lot. That kind of regulated me in so many ways. I also learned to identify the symptoms of the oncoming anxiety attack and how to talk myself off the ledge in so many ways. Then I started to feel better and got off the meds, with doctor's supervision. And as Jessica got older, and there was still the same pressure on me of working full-time, very demanding jobs, and very little help from her father. I think his attitude was, you wanted a baby, you had it, you fix it mentality, which is a whole different set of mental health issues for him. But we won't say that. But I had to get back on them. And then I was on them for maybe 3 to 4 years, and weaned off again, and I've been off of them for a while now. So
during like the first 2 times you're on medication, did you ever seek out therapy or attend therapy? Like,
we did. Actually, we did, and I went with your father.
Well, that was your first mistake.
Right. I did. I had therapy. The first therapist was like, you're young, you had a baby, the death of your baby, you're still grieving it. Then you married, the father of the 2 sons, and he had his own issues going on, and projecting them onto, like most people project on their issues onto someone else. So we did that. I did that therapy for a while. And then when I met Jessica's father, about maybe 8, 9 years into it, we did go to therapy.
Couples therapy or individual therapy?
No, we were in couples therapy.
That's a fucking joke.
I know. It was interesting because the therapist was zeroing in on his relationship with his parents. So I learned, that was one place I learned a little bit about him and how the divorce between his parents impacted him, because he kind of spoke to his father was still manipulating his mother for sex with money. So you know how most ex-husbands or boyfriends are, manipulate and use financial resources.
That's a y'all thing. That's not a me thing.
Well, that generation. So
I'm like, fuck you, bye.
After that, I just said, well, this isn't going to work. If I do focus on therapy, it'll have to be for myself. So then I went into therapy when you were in therapy with your dad. I was there as a side.
Well, I was just going to ask about, so we've talked about a lot about you, and which is important. I'm not saying you don't matter. And your journey of mental health and kind of going through these different therapists and postpartum and all this stuff. But now that knowing kind of my history and me as a child and all these other things, did you ever, how did raising me, because I'm a very anxious person as well, so how did kind of raising me maybe change your viewpoint on mental health or how to approach mental health?
Well, by this time I was working in these nonprofits who had clinical therapists, and we were working closely with clinicians, and we were starting to understand. But for me, and this is probably one of the regrets, is I took your silence as just being shy, because I was shy when I was a little kid. Maybe I was in my own turmoil back then. But I took your silence as she's just shy, and didn't realize that there was something else going on, and what was behind that going on. What were the reasons this was happening? So I've learned to, and working with young pregnant teen moms and young women in gangs, it just started to shift my thinking towards how important that family structure is. And I was trying to create it for you, but I was creating it with someone who he himself didn't have the tools to do so.
Right. Well, I think when you have, a super anxious child, a person who's never dealt with mental health issues, and another person who's also in their own way haven't dealt with their own mental health issues, it's just a clusterfuck. Nothing's gonna change.
No.
I think what you're saying about doing individual work is helpful, and that's why I'm always kind of preaching about within our kind of weird family structure is to go to therapy, not for like another person, not for your child, not for mother, father, sister, brother, but for yourself.
Right.
So you inherently improve yourself and maybe possibly the relationships around you that you've damaged in the process.
Well, see, most of us, because we didn't grow up in an environment or in a decade or, in an era where mental health is spoken the way it is today, we don't recognize the dysfunction that we have because most of the people around us had the same dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
My family grew up with an alcoholic father, and each one of us deals with that trauma. That manifestation of that trauma is different. I had, as you know, I have siblings who are, loud, one submissive, one's being abused, and my sisters are very submissive and in situations that aren't, and not that I was in a better situation, but I recognized that I had to be independent on my own to make myself be happy and not sit around and wait for someone to make me happy. I don't wait, as you know, I don't wait for anybody to do something for me. So my siblings, I have this mindset. Well, we grew up with corporal punishment. Look how we turned out. So yeah, you turn out to be drunks, loud, disrespectful. Treat your children as properties that have to follow your rules, and that's not parenting. That's very just very difficult, unhealed trauma that you're passing on to your children. So, no, yeah. So, and we also grew up in a culture where people didn't talk about mental health. Women my mother's age would be talking about, "Ay, tengo nervios. Tengo nervios. Necesito." Yeah, the nerves. This is anxiety. And they would self-prescribe each other's medication. Like one person who had access to medical care would go and do these physicals and come back with, what do they call them, like volume?
Y'all got Xanax?
It's right, real heavy drugs back then because they didn't. So what would happen is you would go to your next door neighbor and say, "Do you have one of those pills? Because tengo nervios," which is anxiety, but they didn't call it anxiety; they call it the nervios. And they had every right to have the nervios. They were in a very oppressive relationships, multiple children, economically challenged, undereducated, and yeah, you can understand why they felt so anxious.
Well, I think Grandma still feels anxious. She just, now she blames on her heart pacer, not on the heart pacer. It's not working. I just think your heart is racing because you're feeling something, but
right.
Whatever. So, I guess kind of some other questions. I mean, I don't know if you answered this, but talking about kind of being a parent to a daughter who's a little bit culturally different than you, and how that influences how you approach mental health, how you approach parenting me versus parenting my brother.
Well, this comes as a surprise to a lot of people, and a lot of people don't believe. You love your children equally, but you have to show that love differently. Because how I love a grown man is going to be different. The love is there at the same level, but it's going to be different as how I love my grown daughters, or my grown son, my grown daughter. I've given both of you the same opportunities to excel in anything you wanted to excel in. But being that you were a black woman and you identify as a black woman, and I've identified that you are from the minute I was pregnant. I learned I was pregnant. I had to recognize my daughter's going to be black. I had no idea how you would look. But my daughter was going to come into a world that isn't very kind and gentle to black women, or black people in general, people of color too. So, the whole hair thing was a complete challenge for me. But at the end of the day,
we know. You like comb my scalp. So
my
forehead.
That's Puerto Rican moms all together.
I'm pretty sure my hairline is receding because of all the tight ponytails.
My mother started combing my hair on my eyebrows. So and my ponytails were so tight that you can just feel the pulsating around your head from the tightness. But no, I had other concerns. I had, how do I teach my daughter how do I guide my daughter through being a black woman when I myself don't know what being a black woman is like, what it is to be in that particular space. I knew how it was to be a Latina woman, a woman of color, and the challenges you face there. But I was also very aware that at the end of the day, black women have greater challenges than we do. And I've recognized that a lot of what I'm able to do today was done on the backs of black women. So I do not lose sight of that. So, and I don't understand how any woman who's of color cannot acknowledge that fact. There's no other woman in this world, group of women who've had to lose their sons, husbands, fathers to some of the most grotesque violence, and all to create a better life for themselves and others who would soon follow. And to have any form of racism or prejudice against black people is mind-boggling to me.
Well, it's a choice for sure. You know, people make all sorts of decisions, and you know, I think a lot of people struggle with that fact, and you know, Latinos specifically really struggle with that fact. But that's a whole other conversation of how Latinos view themselves, and the whole idea. I know black, I Dominican, you're black, you present as black.
Right. Well, so to answer your question, I always look at you through the lens of you present to the world as a black woman, and it's a fight that I can't have for you, and you know I like to fight. I can't fight it, but I can give you the tools, provide you the support that gives you the confidence to step in that space to be unapologetic about being black.
Which is what I've been preaching on here about, really, maybe in the last year and a half, of being really authentically and unapologetically myself, which for some people is a hard pill to swallow because they're not really used to black women kind of being assertive and confident in that way. And then, you know, that comes across as Jessica's a bitch. But I don't really care what people think about me. It is what it is. I'm sure, especially after this week, I'm sure I've been called a few names, but it is what it is. It's not, I can't change how other people perceive me.
But people come to those conclusions because there's something about you threatens them, threatens their existence, threatens their understanding of who they are. It threatens their image and the illusion of who they are, because another person should, in the same space, should not take anything away from you. No matter how you know, if you're confident and you're knowledgeable, that shouldn't impact another person. You should be able to walk into a room, and it could be filled with beautiful women who are supermodels, you know, hair down to their knees and legs up to their neck, and you should still feel confident in there. And we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a world where everybody is superficial, surface level, insecure, neurotic, and want to be the center of everybody's world, and that's impossible. You have to claim your own universe, create that universe for yourself, and understand that the sun is a big ball of fire, and we can all stand under and shine and feel the heat and feel the warmth of that. But we have a lot of people who've gotten participatory trophies and think life is a participatory trophy journey.
Please stop giving out participation trophies. Please.
I'm not going to...
we cannot celebrate mediocrity anymore.
Right. I am not going to give you a raise because you showed up on time every day. You know, you don't get paid just to show up. You got to show up and show out.
Yeah.
So, and that's not something that we've ingrained in a handful of generations, or people in general. They just feel entitled, unearned confidence.
Right, and I think that comes from certain types of people. I would say mainly white people that kind of have this idea, because a lot of black and brown people of color in general are taught that to get half of what they have, you have to be twice as good, and that means excelling in everything you do. And then you go into these spaces that are predominantly white, where a bunch of people are doing nothing and want every reward, every accolade,
every trophy, yes.
And then you look like the bitch because you're like, you didn't really do anything. So, actually,
yeah, that's that's life in the workplace. I mean, you're going to walk into spaces and work for people who know less than you, people who can say all the buzzwords, people who use intimidation to get people to fear their existence in that space. If you have to manage by intimidation, or you have to engage with people by intimidation, what do you bring to the table? What's your skill set other than being an asshole?
Well, that gets a lot of people a lot of places, so that's why they continue to do it.
Well, we reward that. Yes, we do.
We do. We reward assholes, but not the kind that I like. So anyway, I think that is a good place for me to introduce my final question for you, for this one at least, of now that I'm close to graduating, becoming a therapist, technically am a therapist because I see people, which is crazy to say that people trust me with their lives.
There are no standards.
No standards, no. People are just like, yeah, here's my kid. Go. Fuck it up. Shit.
I can't be any worse than I did.
I guess my closing question is like, what do you think about the work that I'm doing, and then how does it relate to the ways that we have handled mental health in our family?
I think it's great. I think, and I've been telling you this for as long as I can. Remember, this is your vocation. This is not a skill that people have vocations. There are people born to be certain things in life, and there are certain people who are trained to be certain things in life. You happen to have the luxury of having been born with the skill to be a therapist, and then the resources to become a therapist. And I think that you will excel. I have high expectations that you will leave your imprint in a sector or an industry or a, I don't know what you want to call it, segment of our workforce that needs to happen. I've worked with children for 32 years. I've seen young people go to jail. I've seen young mothers have 3 or 4 babies. I've seen just where our children have gone, and you need it. And more black people and more brown people need to take that step and become therapists and become teachers and become the professions that our people need to see. As it relates to my family, I don't think anybody in my family, not too many people in my family, outside of your cousins your age and your brother and surprisingly your nieces, who knows what a therapist is, the rest of my siblings and their spouses, not so much.
Well, I mean, one of my uncles thought I was going to be a veterinarian.
Yeah.
So, but he was very proud that I was going to be a vet. I was like, I'm not. That's not the thing.
Wrong profession. But, yeah, I don't think they... I mean, if you've met these people.
These people.
They could use therapy.
Well, I think some of them have gone to therapy in different ways. They just didn't know what to do with it afterwards, or like how to
keep working at it.
I think the problem is a lot of people treat therapy as like going to like a physician, like a doctor, where you go, you get medicine, you have the flu, you get medicine, you feel better the next day, your fever goes away. That's not the case, especially when you're in your 50s and 60s and you have decades of trauma and built upon, never talked about issues.
Right.
It just doesn't really go away.
The thing for me, and I would close out with this, that what I've learned from our last exposure to therapy is that I had to learn how to communicate with you and how to give you the space, how to recognize when you were anxious, when you were depressed, and it was easy to recognize when you're angry, when you're in the shadow side of that anger. There were times where I felt it was directed at me, and I don't think it was, but at times I felt like you need to have this outburst with your father and not with me.
Well, I mean, for reference, my dad isn't around to have any type of feelings towards good or positive,
right,
good or bad.
Right, that's true too, and that's sad because he's one that can definitely benefit from. But as we just talked about this earlier, I have anxiety. And I also have OCD because I grew up with a father who wanted a clean house, immaculate. It was like living with Felix Unger. So to me, that controlled environment of being organized is soothing for me. But I recognize for you, it is
fuck
not.
all that noise.
It doesn't. So it's like we're trying to coexist with two different, completely different mental health issues in the same house, coexist and be supportive of you, knowing that when I walk into a space and it's chaos, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to just have a meltdown.
You know, and just for reference, chaos to my mother means so many different things than to the average person. So I think I think you're highlighting something important is that generationally, amongst your peers, amongst your friends, is that mental health will look different. Like your anxiety is not going to look the same as your friend. Your depression is not going to look the same as your friend. There might be some similarities, but because you're individuals, there will be stark differences as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, my anxiety and your anxiety outside of driving is different. I don't pace back and forth. I don't, get into that groove. I tend to just clean frenetically around the house. Scrub the bathrooms.
Makes so much sense.
You pace. I clean.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
But we've managed to stay connected. I think
that trauma bonded.
I know. That's scary. But we've look how far we've come.
I guess
we got a long way to go. But just think about where you were years ago.
I guess
you got to.
And then we have an anxiety-riddled dog.
Oh yeah, everybody in this house has some kind of anxiety. The dog.
Mocha's neurotic. It's crazy.
She's a Chihuahua, so it's very attuned to her culture.
She is.
She has a Napoleon complex. She only barks at big dogs. Yep. She's like 14 pounds, and she wants to bark at the 100-pound dog.
But she's a fighter.
She's a scrapper like her owner.
She's a scrapper. That's what her vet has in her chart. She has to be muzzled when she gets her nails cut.
So yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Ew. I hate when you do that voice. But so that's it for today, and I will see you next Sunday with our new episode.